Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we are looking at a stack of sources surrounding Marilynne Robinson's Pulitzer Prize-winning masterpiece, Gilead.
Which is just an unbelievable book.
It really is, and our mission today is to distill a lifetime of wisdom from a dying creature's final, really desperate letter to his young son.
Yeah, and if you have ever wondered what it actually takes to compress an entire human life into, words on a page, or how to leave a legacy that isn't built of brick or stone or bank accounts, you are in the exact right place.
Absolutely.
Because it is a remarkable undertaking, both for the character in the book and, frankly, for Robinson as an author. To give you some context on the literary landscape here, Gilead didn't just win the Pulitzer for fiction in 2005.
They also took home the National Book Critics Circle Award.
Exactly. Reviewers were universally stunned. They were using phrases like visionary work and spiritual intensity and meditative calm.
Which is an incredible reception. But what makes the publication of this book so fascinating is the sheer audacity of Robinson's career timeline.
Oh, it's wild.
Because this was only her second novel. Her debut, Housekeeping, came out in 1981 and was immediately hailed as this absolute classic. And then,
He basically vanishes from fiction.
yeah, she essentially didn't publish another novel for 24 years.
I mean, think about the pressure of that silence. In the publishing world, waiting 2.5 decades to follow up a masterpiece is almost unheard of.
You'd think people would just forget about her.
Right, but the density, the philosophy, and the profound depth of Gilead prove exactly why that gestation period was so necessary.
You can't rush it.
No, you really can't. You don't write a book that serves as a profound meditation on existence, the heavy burdens of American history, and the absolute sacredness of ordinary life without doing some serious living and thinking yourself.
Totally. So to set the stage for you, imagine it the year 1956. We are in the fictional, dusty little town of Gilead, Iowa.
Very quiet, very slow.
Yeah. And our narrator is Reverend John Ames. He's 76 years old, and he is dying.
His heart is failing. The doctor calls it angina pectoris.
Right, a term Ames actually notes has a rather theological, beautiful sound to it, almost like a piece of ancient liturgy.
Which is such a preacher thing to think about while you're literally dying.
Exactly. So, knowing his time is incredibly short, Ames sits down to write a letter. He calls it his begats.
Like the biblical genealogies.
Yeah. It's a spiritual memoir written for his son, a boy who is almost 7 years old, with the intention that the boy will read it when he is a fully grown man.
It's a premise that immediately establishes this ticking clock.
Yeah, you feel the urgency.
But ironically, the narrative itself unfolds with this incredibly slow, deliberate, gentle pulse. Ames is trying to bridge a gap of time he knows he cannot cross physically.
He knows he's not going to make it.
Right. He knows he won't be there to answer his son's questions, to guide him through the turbulent years of adolescence, to teach him how to shave, or to see the man he eventually becomes.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the sheer emotional mechanics of what Ames is attempting here are staggering.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. It's like Ames is trying to compress a massive 76-year zip file of human experience, generational trauma, and incredibly dense theology onto a single, fragile thumb drive.
That's a great way to put it.
And he's handing it to a kid who doesn't even have the software to open it yet. I mean, how do you even begin to explain the world to a child who will barely have any active memories of your voice?
Well, you begin by looking intensely at the miracle of the present moment, which is exactly how Ames grounds himself.
He focuses on the now.
Yeah. To understand the gravity of this letter, you have to understand the shape of Ames's life up to this point. Having a young wife and a nearly 7-year-old son at the age of 76 is something he views as an absolute late-in-life miracle.
Because for the vast majority of his adulthood, he was completely, utterly alone.
Precisely. We have to rewind 50 years prior to the writing of this letter.
50 years.
Yeah, a half-century. When Ames was a very young man, barely starting his ministry, he lost his first wife, Louisa, and their infant daughter, Angeline, in childbirth.
Which is just an earth-shattering trauma.
It completely broke him. And for decades following that tragedy, he didn't remarry. He lived a solitary, intensely frugal, almost ascetic life in the church parsonage.
He literally describes his existence as just getting by on, quote, books and baseball and fried egg sandwiches.
That was it. That was his whole world.
He hoarded his thoughts. He spent all those decades in his study, and he just wrote.
Over the course of his career, he wrote and stored roughly 67,500 pages of handwritten sermons in his attic.
Wait, let's put that number into perspective. That is insane.
It is. As Ames realizes, with a bit of shock, 67,000 pages is a volume of writing comparable to the life's work of foundational theologians like St. Augustine or John Calvin.
So he generated the equivalent of 225 dense books worth of material,
Mostly just sitting alone in a dusty room in Iowa.
preaching to a shrinking congregation.
Yeah, but the mechanics of why he was writing are so heartbreaking. Writing wasn't just a professional duty for him.
No, it was a coping mechanism.
Exactly. It was a physical balm for this immense cavernous loneliness. And what's fascinating here is his relationship to his deceased daughter.
The one who died in childbirth.
Right. He would have named her Rebecca if she had lived. And Ames reveals that as he drafted these thousands of pages of sermons week after week, he wrote them as if that daughter might suddenly walk through the church doors.
No.
He imagined her coming back from the afterlife, coming back from a place where all ultimate truth is already known.
So he's essentially preaching to an audience of one, and an audience who has already seen God face to face.
Exactly. And if you imagine that your primary listener is someone who already knows the secrets of the universe, it completely changes how you write.
You can't get away with the usual fluff.
Right. It forced a rigorous, brutal honesty into his sermons. It stripped away all the petty doctrinal controversies, the desire to sound intellectually superior, the empty religious rhetoric. He couldn't fake it.
Because she would know.
Exactly. He wrote to be true to the ultimate reality of things. And that decades-long practice of writing into the silence, trying to speak across the boundary of life and death, is the exact muscle he uses to write this final letter to his son.
I want to challenge this narrative just a bit, though.
Okay, go for it.
Is this letter actually purely for the son? I mean, Ames is dumping highly complex philosophical concepts and deeply personal historical resentments into this document.
He really is.
Right. Is he really writing this for a future 25-year-old? Or is this letter Ames's way of finally processing his own existence before he has to leave it?
That's a fair question.
Like, is he just trying to prove to himself that his 76 years on Earth actually meant something? It's like sending a message in a bottle across the ocean of time.
It is an incredibly valid question, and I argue it functions as both. Ames is hyper-aware of his impending departure.
You can feel it on every page.
Yeah, his physical reality is constantly intruding on his philosophical musings. He describes the dull thump of his failing heart as going on and on like some old cow chewing her cud.
Which is such a great Midwestern image.
It really is. He knows the machine is breaking down. And that acute awareness of death dramatically sharpens his senses to the physical world around him. He is documenting his existence to prove he was here, yes, but he's also trying to map out the beauty of the world so his son knows how to look at it.
You really feel that physical presence in the text. There's this one scene where Ames looks out his study window.
Oh, the bubble scene.
Yes. He sees his young wife wearing a blue dress and his son in a red shirt. And they are kneeling in the yard, blowing this massive barrage of soap bubbles at their cat.
Our insouciant Soapy, he calls the cat.
Soapy. It's such a perfectly observed detail. The cat is leaping into the air, completely overwhelmed by the glut of opportunity, just trying to catch these bubbles.
And the bubbles are rising up into the branches of the trees, ripening toward that specific iridescent dragonfly blue right before they burst.
And Ames watches this utterly mundane backyard scene and writes, "Ah, this life, this world."
It is an effusion of pure, almost painful joy.
But the tension of the book is that Ames can't just leave his son with pretty pictures of soap bubbles.
No, he has to tell the whole story.
To explain who he is and to explain the world his son is inheriting, Ames realizes he has to look backward. He pulls the listener and his son into the deep, turbulent, and frankly shocking history of his own father and his grandfather.
Because you cannot understand John Ames without understanding the generations of John Ameses that built the psychological ruins he stands on.
Exactly. So let's dive into that history.
This is where the narrative scope of Gilead dramatically expands. We move out of the quiet, dusty study of an old man in 1956 and plunge directly into the violent, fiery history of the American Midwest.
It's quite a tonal shift.
It is. The novel becomes a deep dive into the legacy of 3 generations of preachers, and their theological shifts mirror the shifting soul of America itself.
Let's start with the grandfather, because this guy is an absolute force of nature.
He's terrifying, honestly.
He is a radical, one-eyed abolitionist preacher. He originally moved his family from Maine to Kansas in the 1830s.
And for anyone who skipped 19th century American history class, he moved there specifically to help the Free Soilers.
Let's define that real quick. In the lead up to the Civil War, There was a massive, bloody conflict over whether Kansas would enter the United States as a free state or a slave state.
Right. People from both sides flooded into the territory to try and violently sway the outcome.
A period literally known as Bleeding Kansas.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the grandfather represents a very specific, historically grounded type of American religious zealotry. He embodies the absolute fire of the Old Testament.
This wasn't a man who just preached polite sermons about loving your neighbor.
Not at all. He had literal, visceral visions of Christ in chains. He told his congregation that he could see the iron shackles rankling right down to the Lord's bones. Yeah, and that terrifying vision convinced him that he had to make himself violently useful to the abolitionist cause.
And his definition of useful was extreme. When the Civil War broke out, he joined the Union Army as a chaplain.
But he didn't go through official channels.
Right. His only credential was just showing up to the military camps carrying a Greek New Testament.
That's it. Just walked in.
And back in his hometown, he literally preached the young men of his congregation right into the war. He drove them to enlist with his rhetoric, and as a result, his church was left utterly devastated, filled with nothing but widows and orphans.
And even before the war, during the Bleeding Kansas era, he was directly involved in guerrilla violence. He associated with John Brown, the famous radical abolitionist who believed armed insurrection was the only way to overthrow the institution of slavery.
Which is a heavy association.
Very. There is a very dark, heavy implication in the text that the grandfather might have been directly involved in the killing of a pro-slavery farmer. He was a man who believed that righteous violence was a holy sacrament.
And the terror of that righteousness didn't stop at the battlefield. I mean, he brought it right into his own living room.
He was a nightmare to live with.
He practiced a kind of holy poverty that was incredibly destructive to his own family. He would literally take the warm blankets off his own children's beds in the middle of winter.
Just give them away?
Yeah, to anyone who asked or to anyone he felt needed them more. Ames's mother used to have to hide her meager, desperate savings in cans of baking powder or bury coins deep in the sugar bowl.
Just so the grandfather wouldn't find the money and give it away to a passing stranger.
It's just madness.
Ames, looking back, says he believes his grandfather was a saint, but he acknowledges that a saint is an incredibly difficult, dangerous thing to live with.
I can imagine.
Historical change of that magnitude, the literal eradication of chattel slavery, often requires people of fanatical, single-minded intensity. But that intensity is a fire that burns everyone who stands too close to it.
Which brings us to Ames's father. Contrast the grandfather with the father.
It's night and day.
The father grew up watching this fiery, chaotic, violent brand of Christianity traumatize his family and tear his town apart. And he rejected it completely.
He swung the pendulum to the absolute opposite extreme.
Right. He became a Christian pacifist. He represented rational, quiet peacemaking. He was deeply alienated by the grandfather's zealotry.
So you have our narrator, the current John Ames, caught squarely in the middle of these two immense polarizing figures. The grandfather is righteous fire. The father is quiet ash.
And Ames loves them both.
He loves and respects them both, but he sees the profound theological flaws in both their approaches to God and to the world. The grandfather's violence lacked grace, and the father's pacifism sometimes lacked the courage to confront profound evil.
This generational tension culminates in what I think is one of the most gripping cinematic stories in the entire text.
Oh, the journey to Kansas?
Yes. We jump to the year 1892. The grandfather, suffering from what we might now recognize as severe PTSD or maybe dementia, has run off back to Kansas and died.
Out in the wilderness.
And Ames's father decides he must go find the grave. So 12-year-old Ames and his pacifist father set off on this harrowing journey through drought-stricken Kansas.
The landscape Robinson paints here is basically apocalyptic. The towns are completely emptied out by the severe drought. They are essentially wandering through a wasteland to the point where they are genuinely, physically starving.
The mechanical details of this journey are incredible. They can't buy food because the general stores are abandoned, and paper money is completely worthless anyway.
Right, nobody wants paper.
So they finally stumble upon an isolated, desperate farmstead, and they trade their miserable, dried-up pieces of jerky for 2 boiled eggs and 2 boiled potatoes.
And they get this food from an old woman who is notably missing an index finger.
Ames remembers that detail vividly, and he knows that those potatoes tasted wonderful even without salt.
Because they were starving. So this woman points them toward a ruined, overgrown graveyard in the middle of nowhere.
And when they finally find it, it's not a peaceful cemetery.
No, it's just a forgotten patch of parched, baked earth. Everywhere they step, little grasshoppers fly up, making a harsh snapping sound that Ames compares to the sound of striking a match.
So vivid. They search for hours and finally find the grandfather's grave. It is marked only by a piece of raw bark where someone had driven nails partway in and bent them down flat to crudely spell Rovi Am Ents.
It's such a stark, brutal image of legacy. Here is a man who waged holy war, who changed the course of American history, buried under a piece of bark with bent nails.
They spent hours clearing the brush away, terrified of accidentally stepping on the unmarked graves of children hidden in the deep weeds.
And then, at the end of this exhausting day, there's this profound cosmic moment.
I love this part.
Ames and his father are standing by the grave. Ames looks up and he sees the sun setting directly in the west, and at the exact same moment, a massive, brilliant full moon is rising directly in the east.
They are standing precisely between these two immense celestial bodies. The lighting is perfectly balanced.
Ames describes it as feeling like there were palpable physical currents of light passing back and forth between the sun and the moon. Taut skeins of light suspended right over their heads in this desolate graveyard.
It's a moment of overwhelming, transcendent beauty, right in the middle of absolute historical desolation.
And that aesthetic of beauty pulled from the ashes ties into another memory Ames shares about his father.
The church scene.
Yeah. He remembers being a child and watching his father and the men of the congregation tearing down the grandfather's ruined, lightning-struck church in the pouring rain.
The men are completely covered in soot and black ash.
And Ames's father, looking like a charred martyr, takes a piece of a biscuit from his shirt pocket, breaks it with his ash-covered hands, and feeds it to young Ames right there in the rain.
Wow. Ames recognizes this, looking back, as a profound moment of communion. It is the biblical concept of the bread of affliction brought to literal life.
The father is offering a sacrament of survival amidst the ruins of the grandfather's destructive legacy.
But I have to stop and ask you to analyze the mechanics of this.
Hmm.
Because how do you reconcile these things?
It's tough.
How does the text reconcile a saint like the grandfather? A man driven by righteous visions in slavery with the sheer terror, the physical instability, and the emotional abuse he inflicts on his own children.
Right.
He literally forces his family into a situation where a mother has to hide coins in the baking powder just to ensure her children don't starve. How does Ames process that?
It raises an incredibly difficult question about the nature of righteousness. And Robinson doesn't offer a clean, simple reconciliation.
There's no neat bow.
No. She's showing that the grand sweeping arc of moral history often requires people who are entirely unsuited for normal human relationships. The grandfather was perfectly built for the wilderness and for war.
But terrible at home.
Exactly. He was entirely unsuited for peace or for domestic life. He couldn't exist without a crusade.
Nullity. That's the word Ames uses.
Absolutely. Yeah.
He uses nullity to describe what happens to his grandfather when the war is over and slavery is legally abolished. He has nowhere left to spend his immense courage, so he just burns up his own family.
Exactly. And Ames, writing from the quiet, relatively peaceful vantage point of 1956, understands that he has lived a very sheltered life compared to his grandfather.
He hasn't fought in any wars.
But he also recognizes that his quiet life has its own profound, equal spiritual validity. He doesn't need to see Christ in chains to know God is present, which leads us directly into Ames's own specific theological worldview.
What we might call the sacrament of the ordinary.
Yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You have John Ames, who is a devout, highly educated Calvinist preacher. He's a man who has read thousands of pages of dense theological texts.
And written thousands more.
Right. But he finds his greatest spiritual affirmations not in strict dogma, not in lightning strike visions, but in the physical sensory details of the everyday world. He writes to his son that he is so full of admiration for existence that he can hardly enjoy it properly.
Ames has a very specific, nuanced theology of blessing. For Ames, to bless something doesn't magically create a sacredness that wasn't there before.
It's already there.
A blessing simply acknowledges the sacredness that is already inherently present in the physical world. When he blesses someone, he feels the mysterious life of that creature and his own mysterious life simultaneously vibrating together.
And he illustrates this with a childhood memory that is just hilarious but deeply theological. He talks about baptizing a litter of feral barn cats.
It is a wonderful scene. Young Ames and his friends find a litter of wild kittens in a barn. Being pious children raised in a deeply religious town, they decide they need to save the kittens' souls.
Naturally.
Naturally. They try to swaddle these fiercely squirming, scratching little animals in dull dresses, and young Ames actually moistens their brows with water and repeats the full Trinitarian formula over them.
Let's define that for anyone who didn't grow up in a church. The Trinitarian formula is the traditional Christian baptismal phrase. I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
It's a very serious ritual.
So you have this kid solemnly pronouncing ancient liturgy over a squirming barn cat.
But then, the mother cat, this grim, battle-scarred, crooked-tailed thing, comes back and angrily carries her babies away by the scruff of their necks.
So the kids completely lose track of which cats were properly baptized and which were carried back into the darkness of paganism.
And one of the cats, whom they name Sparkle, grows up to become a notorious, unrepentant rabbit thief.
A menace to the town.
Exactly. And a Baptist friend of theirs points out that they should have named the cat Sprinkle, because a mere sprinkle of water obviously didn't take, and they needed total immersion to really save the cat.
That denominational shade. It's a very funny anecdote highlighting that bickering, but Ames treats the memory with genuine theological curiosity.
He really does.
He remembers the physical sensation of how those warm little animal brows felt under the palm of his hand. He realizes that to touch a creature with the pure, focused intention of blessing it is a profoundly altering experience.
It changes the person doing the blessing. It stays in the mind forever.
And he specifically links this theology of blessing to the physical element of water. And here is where Robinson does something brilliant. Ames quotes the philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach.
Which is a wild inclusion.
Okay, let's pause and define who Feuerbach was, because this is wild. Feuerbach was a 19th century German philosopher and anthropologist who was famously an atheist.
A very vocal one.
His big argument was that God is essentially just a psychological projection of human ideals. He argued that we take all the best parts of humanity, love, joy, wisdom, project them onto the sky and call it God.
Yep.
So for a devout Calvinist minister like Ames to be reading and quoting a famous atheist who says God is a human invention that is a massive philosophical flex, why does Ames like him?
Ames appreciates Feuerbach because despite the atheism, Feuerbach truly, deeply loves the physical world, and he understands the joyful human aspects of religion better than many theologians do.
He gets the human element.
Right. Feuerbach argued that water is selected as the universal vehicle for religious blessing, not because God commanded it, but because of what water already is.
By its very nature.
Yes, by its very nature as a pure, clear, life-giving liquid, water possesses a beautiful, profound significance of joy.
Ames adopts that completely. He believes that the physical world is constantly demonstrating grace to us, if we just have the eyes to pay attention.
He tells his son a story about walking up to the church early one morning after a heavy rainstorm.
Oh, I love this part.
He sees a young couple strolling ahead of him on the sidewalk. And on pure, joyful impulse, the young man jumps up and catches a low-hanging tree branch, pulling it down so that a massive storm of luminous, trapped rainwater comes pouring over both of them.
Just completely soaks them.
And they just take off down the street, completely soaked and laughing. Ames calls it beautiful, like something from an ancient myth. He concludes that water was made primarily for blessing and only secondarily for growing vegetables or doing the wash.
This intense, appreciative attention to the physical world extends down to the mechanics of language itself.
He thinks a lot about words.
Ames talks about his deep frustration with writing because he feels that proper, grammatically correct language refuses to acknowledge the sheer, overwhelming lavishness of reality. He fixates on the humble word, just.
It's such a small word to fixate on.
I love his breakdown of this word. He says he wants to write to his son that the sun just shone and the tree just glistened and the water just poured.
He argues that people intuitively use that word when they want to call attention to a thing existing in absolute excess of itself.
Right, it's ordinary in its kind. It's just a tree, but it is completely exceptional in its degree.
And that functionally is Ames's definition of grace, the ordinary existing in excess of itself.
But of course the novel pivots here.
And it has to.
Because grace is very easy to see in a shower of water from a tree or in a laughing young couple. Grace is much, much harder to conceptualize when it comes to the deep, tangled, ugly resentments of human relationships.
Which brings us to the storm cloud that rolls into Ames's peaceful, reflective final days.
If Ames has this beautiful theory that the everyday world is dripping with grace, that theory is put to the ultimate test the second a ghost from his past walks up onto his front porch.
Let's talk about the Boughton family, and specifically Jack.
Yes, Jack. To set this up, Ames's best friend in the world is Reverend Boughton, the Presbyterian minister in town.
They have been lifelong friends, almost like brothers.
Boughton is ailing now, mostly confined to his house, cared for by his devoted daughter, Glory. But the real focal point of Boughton's entire life, the source of his greatest joy and his most agonizing sorrow, is his prodigal son, Jack.
Jack's full name is John Ames Boughton. He is literally Ames's namesake.
Which adds so much pressure.
And after being away from Gilead for 20 years, shrouded in rumor and silence, Jack has suddenly returned home, and his physical return brings this immense, suffocating tension into the narrative.
Because Jack is an incredibly complicated, slippery figure.
Very slippery. He is highly intelligent, well-read, and impeccably polite, but he's also deeply cynical. He carries what Ames describes as a sly, weary anger.
Even from a very young age, Jack was always a source of trouble, always carrying an element of devilment, thievery, or quiet mockery.
And upon his return, he zeroes in on Ames. Jack comes over to Ames's porch, sits down, and casually, almost conversationally, asks for Ames's professional theological views on the doctrine of predestination.
Which is an incredibly loaded, dangerous question for a Calvinist minister to navigate.
It's basically a trap.
Let's stop and define Calvinism and predestination, because the listener needs to understand the exact mechanics of why this question is basically a weapon.
Sure.
For a strict Calvinist, predestination means that God, before the creation of the universe, already decided who is going to heaven, the elect, and who is going to hell, the reprobate.
There is nothing you can do to change your status. The guest list was finalized before you were born.
Exactly. So when Jack asks about predestination, he's not asking a textbook question for seminary class.
No, not at all.
He's asking, was I born broken? Did God design me to fail? Am I fundamentally unlovable?
Exactly. Jack asks Ames, does it seem right to you that there should be no common language between us? That between us and you there is a great gulf fixed?
Heavy.
Jack is using highly specific theological language to ask a deeply personal, agonizing question about his own flawed nature and whether he is unsalvageable.
And Ames struggles with Jack. He struggles deeply to formulate an answer, and we have to understand why Ames is so guarded. Jack's past isn't just a matter of youthful pranks or skipping church.
Jack has a genuinely dark, destructive history in the town of Gilead.
Let's lay out the mechanics of what Jack actually did 20 years ago, because it's brutal and it completely grounds Ames's apprehension.
It's very grim.
When Jack was a college student, home in Gilead on break, he preyed on a very young, severely impoverished girl from the outskirts of town.
Ames describes her living in a squalid, isolated house surrounded by mean dogs, a truly desolate, vulnerable situation.
Jack gets her pregnant and essentially abandons her.
He literally leaves town. He goes back to his comfortable college life with his leather sweater and his convertible and leaves this young, uneducated girl to raise their child in absolute crushing destitution.
The details of the child's short life are harrowing. Glory, Jack's sister, tries desperately to help. She brings the girl's family canned ham and milk, but the family is too proud, too deeply angry at the Boughtons to accept the charity cleanly.
Glory becomes so desperate that she actually plots to kidnap the baby just to get her into a safe, clean environment.
Which is wild for a minister's daughter.
She talks to Ames about using the old Underground Railroad hiding spots in the historic houses in Gilead to physically hide the child.
Which Ames has to firmly talk her out of, pointing out the legal reality that stealing a child is a felony, regardless of the noble intention behind it.
So the child stays in that terrible environment. She grows into a spry, wiry little 3-year-old, running around barefoot, and then she cuts her foot on something in the yard.
And in those days, before antibiotics were widely available, a dirty cut was a potential death sentence. The little girl dies of a simple infection.
The wealthy Boughton family pays for the burial and puts a stone over the grave that just says, baby. Because the mother, in her grief and chaos, never even settled on an official name.
It is a massive, traumatic failure of moral responsibility on Jack's part. It is a scar on the town.
So when Jack returns 20 years later, acting polite and wearing nice suits and asking intellectual questions about theology, Ames is incredibly guarded.
He knows what Jack is capable of destroying.
But there's another layer to Ames's resentment, a much more personal, deeply psychological layer. If we connect this to the bigger picture of Ames's life, remember, Ames spent 50 years desperately lonely, longing for a wife and a child, wandering around his empty parsonage.
He felt a great vital part of human life was completely closed off to him.
And here is Jack, who was given a child, who was given a massive loving family, and he just threw it away like garbage.
He squandered the exact thing Ames was starving for.
Ames admits to himself, in the privacy of this letter, that he doesn't forgive Jack. He says, "I wouldn't know where to begin."
Which brings up a profound contradiction that goes right to the heart of the novel.
A huge contradiction.
Yes. I want to push back hard on this whole narrative of Ames as this incredibly wise, benevolent, spiritual guy.
Okay, let's hear it.
He spends 50 years preaching from a pulpit about the unconditional radical grace of God. He writes hundreds of sermons analyzing the parable of the prodigal son. But the absolute second, a real deeply flawed prodigal son, Jack, actually shows up on his porch, needing that exact grace. Ames basically turns into a grumpy old man trying to protect his lawn.
That's a very fair read.
Isn't he just being a massive hypocrite? Isn't this a complete theological failure?
That is the exact tension Robinson wants you to feel. It is a theological failure, but it is driven by a fiercely human, protective instinct.
He's trying to protect his family.
Ames is brutally honest with himself about this hypocrisy. He realizes his theology demands that he view Jack with grace, but his human heart views Jack with intense suspicion and fear.
Because Jack is spending a lot of time charming Ames's young, naive wife and his little boy.
Ames is terrified that Jack is going to hurt them after Ames is dead. He says, "I have no idea why he is at home. He's waiting for the other shoe to drop, and he wants to shield his fragile new family from the blast radius."
And then the shoe does drop. We get to the climax of Jack's storyline, and Jack finally reveals his secret.
The real reason he came back.
He reveals the actual mechanical reason why he has returned to Gilead after 20 years, and why he's been asking Ames so many probing questions about the town's abolitionist history.
What's fascinating here is where Robinson shifts the focus. She moves from a purely personal morality play into an examination of the harsh, systemic social realities of America in the 1950s.
Jack confesses to Ames that he hasn't just been wandering aimlessly. He has a wife. Her name is Della, and they have a son together, Robert Botten Miles.
But there is a massive structural catch. Della is a black woman. She is the highly educated daughter of a respected AME minister in Memphis.
Let's define AME for context.
Sure. The African Methodist Episcopal Church is the first independent Protestant denomination founded by black people in the United States.
Right, so Della comes from a lineage of proud, established black leadership, which parallels Jack's own lineage of white Protestant leadership.
Jack met her when she was working as an English teacher in St. Louis. He helped her pick up some dropped papers in the rain. They struck up a conversation, they fell in love, and they have been desperately trying to build a normal life together.
But in the 1950s, in many parts of the country, their relationship isn't just socially frowned upon.
No, it is a literal crime.
Jack tells Ames about the legal mechanics of their oppression. He specifically uses the phrases pernicious cohabitation or lascivious cohabitation.
For listeners who aren't familiar with this era, these were the legal terms used in anti-miscegenation laws.
Because of these state laws, Jack and Della cannot legally be married. If they live together, they can be arrested, charged with a felony, and sent to prison simply for existing as a mixed-race couple.
It is a completely heartbreaking, claustrophobic situation. Jack explains the mechanics of how these laws functionally destroyed their daily life.
They tried to live together in a cheap residential hotel, but the clerk realized they were a couple and extorted them.
Charging them double just to turn a blind eye and not call the police.
They finally managed to rent a small house in a mixed neighborhood. But then Jack's boss at the shoe store sees them walking together in a park.
The boss fires Jack immediately to protect the store's good name.
Jack, exhausted and humiliated, hits the boss. The police get involved, and they explicitly threaten Jack and Della with the cohabitation laws.
They make it clear that if they don't separate, they will be thrown in a cell. Jack is forced to put his wife and his son on a bus back to her family in Memphis just to keep himself out of jail and to keep them safe from state violence.
So we finally understand Jack's desperation. He has come back to Gilead because he has nowhere else to go.
He knows the history. He knows that Gilead was founded by radical abolitionists.
He knows his own family and Ames's family were part of the Underground Railroad, hiding runaway slaves in their cellars.
He hopes, against all odds, that this specific town, with its fierce anti-slavery origins, might still be a safe haven. He looks at Ames and asks, if we came here and got married, could we live here? Would people leave us alone?
And this is where the tragic, devastating irony of Gilead really hits home.
It's a brutal realization for Ames.
Ames has to look at Jack, this man he has resented and judged, and admit the ugly truth about their town. Ames realizes that the town's black population is entirely gone.
There was a mysterious fire at the Negro church years ago, and afterward, the black community wasn't supported.
They just slowly drifted away to Chicago or elsewhere. Gilead is no longer the radical, brave outpost it was in the 1850s.
It has withered into a forgetful, provincial, entirely white town that would likely be scandalized by Jack and Della.
Ames has to tell Jack the truth. He cannot guarantee Jack's family would be safe or accepted or left alone.
The town has completely lost its historical memory. The revolutionary fire of the grandfather's generation has burned down to cold ash.
It's like Gilead is a massive stone fortress that was built by zealots for a noble war. But over the generations, the people living comfortably inside the fortress completely forgot what the walls were actually built for.
They lost the cause.
And so when someone like Jack actually shows up at the gates, bleeding, exhausted, and desperately needing sanctuary from a racist legal system, the fortress is utterly useless. The drawbridge won't come down. Jack is left stranded in the wilderness.
That fortress analogy captures it perfectly. And Jack, with his characteristic weary intelligence, understands immediately.
He knows the dream of sanctuary is dead.
He knows he has to leave his father, who is actively dying, and go back into exile to try and provide for his wife and son in a country that structurally refuses to recognize their family.
This revelation completely reframes Jack's character for Ames and for the reader.
Jack isn't just a cynical, selfish prodigal anymore. He is a man bearing an immense, structurally imposed burden. He is trying to do the right thing in a society engineered to prevent it.
And Ames finally sees this. He finally sees the true, crushing weight Jack is carrying. He sees what he calls the courage and loneliness of Jack's situation.
And in seeing that vulnerability, the 50 years of resentment and fear Ames held finally break. He finally extends grace.
Which logically leads us to the final meditative movement of the book. Witnessing Jack's forced departure forces Ames to confront his own anxieties about his impending death, centering heavily on his realization of what he must do regarding his own wife and son.
Right. We haven't talked much about Ames's wife yet, mostly because, incredibly, we are never actually given her name in the text.
She's always just referred to as your mother to the son reading the letter.
But she is this incredible, grounding, almost elemental presence in the book. She just showed up in Ames's church one rainy Sunday, a much younger woman, carrying some deep, unspoken sorrow from a hard, unrecorded life on the road.
Their relationship is a profound study in the mechanics of grace. Ames notes that it was her idea to get married.
She was the one who asked him.
She was the one who looked at this lonely, aging man hoarding his sermons in a dusty parsonage and decided to build a life with him. She speaks in this low, soft voice, and Ames pays close attention to her language, specifically her use of the phrase, "It don't matter."
Yes. I love the theology he builds around that simple phrase.
When someone wrongs her, or when a debt goes unpaid, she just says, "It don't matter." Ames describes this as a prodigal renunciation of the world's offenses.
She just empties her hands of grievance. She refuses to hold on to the heavy accounting of who owes who.
And witnessing her unforced grace, combined with the tragedy of Jack's forced departure, brings Ames to a massive theological and emotional breakthrough.
For the entire duration of writing this letter, Ames has been quietly agonizing over the fact that his death means he is leaving his wife and son with almost no money, no property, and no physical protection.
He has felt a gnawing guilt for bringing them into his life only to abandon them.
But then he reflects on the mechanics of the biblical story of Abraham, Hagar, and Ishmael from the book of Genesis.
To summarize, Abraham is forced to send his servant Hagar and his own son Ishmael out into the brutal desert wilderness with basically nothing but a skin of water and some bread.
It is a story of terrifying abandonment.
It is a terrifying story on its face. But Ames, in his final days, finds profound, stabilizing comfort in it.
He dissects the theological mechanics of that story and realizes that its ultimate message is about the limits of human provision.
The story dictates that even when a human father is forced to send his family away, even when a mother is alone and out of water in the deadly desert, God provides.
The text says there are angels in the wilderness. God opens Hagar's eyes to see a well of water that saves them.
Ames realizes he has to let his family go. He has to stop trying to control the future from beyond the grave. He has to trust the overarching providence of God.
He realizes he can't hoard his family, just like he couldn't hoard his life or his sermons.
He writes about his fierce, burning love for his wife. He says if he had a rosy, wealthy wife and 10 children, He would gladly walk 1,000 miles on the coldest night of the year just for the brief sight of his current wife's face.
He loves her that much, but he knows his time as her protector is done.
The quiet evenings they spend together in those final pages take on this incredible, incandescent beauty. It's the sacrament of the ordinary fully realized.
They just eat meatloaf together at the table. She reads The Trail of a Lonesome Pine out loud by candlelight.
Ames watches Jack leave town, walking to the bus stop with a suitcase that weighs almost nothing, looking elegant and brave as he heads back into his exile.
Ames physically lays a hand on Jack's head and blesses him as he leaves. It is an ending characterized by profound, total relinquishment.
So what does this all mean? We've journeyed through this old man's memories, through the fires of abolitionist Kansas, through devastating droughts, deep theological debates, and quiet Sunday mornings eating fried egg sandwiches. What is the ultimate takeaway from these 67,500 pages of life?
Gilead is fundamentally a masterclass in learning how to see the incandescence in the ordinary.
It teaches us that history is a heavy physical burden, one that is often conveniently forgotten by those who inherit its comforts.
It teaches us that grace is often wildly unfair, like a father's enduring love for a prodigal son who has caused immense pain, or God's love for a deeply flawed humanity.
But most importantly, it insists that existence itself, in all its terrifying fragility, its sorrow, and its brevity, is a profound, beautiful privilege.
It truly is.
I want to turn this directly to you, the listener, for a moment. Think about a specific quote from Ames where he says, "Every single one of us is a little civilization built on the ruins of any number of preceding civilizations."
Take a moment and look at your own hometown. Look at the oldest people in your own family tree.
Consider the invisible histories, the buried psychological ruins, the forgotten struggles and compromises that have shaped the exact circumstances of your daily life.
We walk over these histories every single day, mostly unaware of the fires that had to burn to clear the ground we stand on.
Ames's letter is a desperate, beautiful attempt to painstakingly excavate his own ruins so his son won't have to walk blindly over them. He is doing the hard work of historical memory.
Which is becoming rarer these days.
Which brings me to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with, something that builds on Ames's project, but exists entirely in our modern reality.
Let's hear it.
We live in an age where we document everything instantly, with zero friction. Our photos, our random passing thoughts, our videos of soap bubbles, they are all instantly backed up to the cloud. They are perfectly preserved, weightless, and effortless.
It's all just there.
But think about the profound physical intimacy of what John Ames did. He poured his soul into a handwritten letter, his handwriting physically degrading as his heart failed page by page.
He knew it was a fragile physical object. He knew it could easily be lost in a move, burned in a fire, or simply misunderstood.
If Ames had just recorded a quick video message on a smartphone, or left a clean digital file on a hard drive, would it carry the same sacred weight?
Probably not.
Does the vulnerability, the sheer impermanence, and the exhausting physical effort of putting pen to paper actually create the spiritual connection he so desperately wanted with his son? Is the effort itself the blessing?
It is a fascinating question about the nature of legacy and whether the frictionless digital world actually robs us of the physical weight of memory.
It is absolutely something to mull over. But as we sign off today, I keep going back to where we started. That idea of a legacy being a solid monument, a hospital wing, a carved stone.
John Ames didn't leave a monument. He left a fragile stack of paper.
He left a quiet, muddy, rigorously honest diagnostic of his own soul, trusting that the love poured into the effort would outlast the paper itself.
Thank you so much for joining us as we explored the quiet, incandescent beauty of Gilead.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive. Keep reading, keep questioning, and maybe go find a pen and write a physical letter to someone you love. See you next time.